The solicitor called me at 7:30 on a Friday evening, the night before my husband's brother got married. My husband was the best man. He was already at the hotel 2 hours away, helping hang fairy lights and set out chairs with his brother and his father, and I was standing in my own kitchen with my wedding outfit hanging on the back of the door, when a man I had never spoken to in my life told me my husband was having an affair with his client's wife. I want to be straight about this from the start, because there's no soft way into the next part, and I'm not going to pretend there is. He didn't hint. He didn't ask if I'd noticed anything odd lately, the way people do in films when they're trying to be gentle about bad news. He told me plainly, because it was his job to tell me plainly. He was representing a man whose wife had been sleeping with my husband for the better part of a year, and in going through her phone records for his own case, my husband's name had come up enough times that he thought I deserved to hear it from him before I heard it in a courtroom. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the phone. I asked him, in a voice that didn't sound like mine, if he was completely sure. He said he was. I asked for one more thing, the dates. He gave me 4, off the top of his head, the ones that mattered most for his own case. I wrote them on the back of an envelope on the counter, because it was the only paper in front of me. I thanked him. I hung up. Then I stood in my kitchen, in a house my husband was going to sleep back in that night, the night before he stood in front of 200 people and gave a speech about loyalty to his own brother, and I did not cry, not once. I folded the envelope in half and put it in my handbag, and I put the kettle on, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I'll keep this part fairly short, because it doesn't deserve more than that. 9 years married, 12 together, 2 kids, one of them the flower girl the next day, one of them the ring bearer, a 3-bedroom house outside town, an ordinary life that looked, from the outside, like the kind of thing people say they want. Declan, that's what I'll call him, was the sort of man who was good at parties, good with his mother's friends, good with the lads at his brother's stag, the one people described as great Crayic, without ever quite being able to say what he'd actually done that was so great. His younger brother Cormac was quieter, more careful, and I think their whole family had unconsciously sorted the two of them into roles years before I ever met either of them. Cormac was the steady one, Declan was the golden one. I didn't think much about that at the time. I think about it constantly now, because it's exactly why nobody, including me, questioned him for as long as they didn't. The past year had given him cover, without him even needing to build it. His brother's wedding took the better part of a year to plan, and Declan had been helping the whole way through it. Extra evenings out for venue meetings that didn't need him there, extra calls about the seating plan that somehow ran past 10 at night. None of it looked strange, because all of it had a reasonable explanation sitting right there, ready-made, and I never once had to go looking for one, because he handed them to me before I could ask. There were small things before that Friday night too, if I'm honest with myself now, and I'm not going to dress them up as some tragic pattern I should have caught sooner, because that's not a fair thing to do to myself. A hotel receipt I didn't ask about because I assumed it was for work. A weekend conference, 2 hours from anywhere his job had ever sent him before. A stretch of a few months where he started going to the gym 4 mornings a week and buying new shirts. And I told myself, generously, that a man in his late 30s is allowed to care about how he looks without it meaning anything. He stopped reaching for me at night somewhere in the middle of all that too, and I told myself that was just what 9 years does to 2 people, because that's an easier thing to believe than the alternative, and easier things get believed a lot more often than they get questioned. I'm not telling you any of this to make you feel sorry for me, and I'm not telling it to make Declan sound complicated or torn or any of the things people like to imagine about someone who cheats. He wasn't complicated. He was a man who'd been having an affair for the better part of a year and had gotten comfortable enough with not getting caught that he barely bothered adjusting his story when he needed one. His family adored him, and I want to be clear that I understood exactly why, because for a long time I adored him for the same reasons. At his mother's 60th birthday, he'd stood up unprompted and given a toast that had half the room in tears, including me. He was the one who remembered everyone's birthday without being reminded, The one who'd drive 2 hours at short notice if his mother's boiler broke. None of that was an act, as far as I could ever tell. He was genuinely warm with the people he loved. It just turned out that being warm with people and being honest with them were two entirely separate skills, and he'd only ever really needed the first one to get by. What I did that Friday night, once I hung up the phone, was get through the next 12 hours. I had a wedding to go to in the morning. My daughter had a flower basket laid out on her bed, ribbons and all, because she'd insisted on arranging it herself. And I already knew, standing in that kitchen with the kettle boiling behind me, that whatever I was eventually going to do about this, it wasn't going to happen tomorrow, and it wasn't going to happen because I was angry enough to make it happen fast. After I hung up, I didn't go to bed. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled up our joint account on my phone, because I wanted to know, before I did anything else, whether 4 dates from a stranger on the phone were going to hold up against something I could see with my own eyes. They did. 2 of the 4 dates matched hotel charges I'd never questioned, €210 and €195, both at the same hotel, 2 hours away, both on nights Declan had told me he was at a work thing with no signal. I remembered one of those nights specifically, because it was the same week I'd paid our daughter's dentist bill out of my own savings account, because the joint account had been tight that month. I sat and did the maths on that for longer than I'm proud of. Tight enough that I'd covered a dentist bill alone, but not too tight for €210 at a hotel 2 hours from anywhere he had any business being. I looked up the name the solicitor had let slip near the end of the call. Aisling, he'd said, because it was going to come out anyway, and he saw no reason to make me wait for it. I didn't go digging into her life that night. I told myself I would, later, if it mattered, and it turned out it didn't matter nearly as much as I expected it to. What mattered was Declan, and what he'd done, and what I was going to do about that. At one point, I went up and stood in the doorway of my kids' room for a few minutes. I want to be honest about why, because I don't think it was sentimental, not really. I wasn't standing there gathering strength from watching them sleep, or any of the things people say in stories like this. I was standing there doing arithmetic. In the morning, my daughter was walking down an aisle holding flowers. My son was carrying a ring on a little cushion he'd practiced with for 2 weeks. Neither of them needed their father's affair attached to that memory for the rest of their lives, and neither of them needed a scene at their uncle's wedding to be the thing they remembered about it instead of the wedding itself. I made a decision at that kitchen table, and it wasn't a kind one, and it wasn't a forgiving one either. It was practical, plain and simple. I decided I was not going to be the reason Cormac and his wife's wedding day became a story about my marriage instead of theirs. Not because I was protecting Declan. I want to be very clear about that, because it would be easy to hear this and think I was being generous toward him. I wasn't. I was protecting 2 children who hadn't done anything wrong, and a brother-in-law who hadn't done anything wrong either, from a mess that belonged entirely to Declan and to nobody else in that hotel. I got the envelope out of my handbag. Under the 4 dates, I wrote 3 words: not tomorrow. Then I went upstairs, laid out my daughter's dress for the morning so there'd be no scramble before we left, and got a few hours of sleep I don't actually remember getting. I lay awake going through it a 3rd time, a 4th time, checking whether there was some innocent version of €210 at a hotel 2 hours away that I simply hadn't thought of yet. There wasn't. I'm not someone who normally goes looking for the worst explanation of anything. If anything, I've spent most of my life doing the opposite, giving people the benefit of the doubt long past the point where it was sensible. That night, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let myself stop doing that, just for a few hours, just long enough to see the numbers for exactly what they were instead of what I wanted them to be. I want to say one more thing about that night, because it matters for everything that comes after it. I did not decide to forgive Declan. I did not decide to confront him either. I decided to wait exactly as long as it took to do this properly, and not one single day longer than that. The wedding happened the way weddings happen. I got through it, and I'm not going to pretend that was easy, but I'm also not going to turn it into more of a scene than it was, because it wasn't one. I held my daughter's hand at the top of the aisle and let go at exactly the right moment, the way we'd practiced. I sat through Declan's best man speech, which had a line in it about how his brother had found someone who'd stick by him no matter what. And I clapped when everyone else clapped, and I didn't feel anything about the irony of that line, because I was too busy holding my face still to feel much of anything at all. I told his mother I had a headache at 9:30 and went up to our room early. Declan stayed down at the bar with his brothers until after midnight. I was already pretending to be asleep when he came in. That's the whole wedding. I'm not going to make it more dramatic than it was, because the drama wasn't in that room. It was in what happened after, and that part took the better part of a year. The Monday after, Declan asked me if I was all right. I told him I was just tired from the wedding, which was true in a way, just not the way he meant it. He asked again on the Wednesday, a little more pointed that time, and I told him the same thing. I want to be honest about why I didn't say anything to him directly in that window, because it wasn't fear, and it wasn't hesitation either. I simply didn't see any version of confronting him myself that ended with anything other than him getting a run-up at his own version of events before I'd finished putting mine together. I'd watched him talk his way smoothly through small things for 9 years. A dented car, a missed birthday, a late night that turned into a later morning. I wasn't going to hand him a live conversation to work with when a folder of dates and numbers would do the job far better and leave him nothing to talk his way around. That was a Saturday. By the following Wednesday, I was sitting across a desk from a solicitor of my own. She was matter-of-fact in a way I found strangely steadying that day, given the state I was in. She asked me to lay out everything I had, in order, without editing it to sound worse or better than it was. I gave her the envelope, the 2 hotel charges, the 4 dates. Then she asked me one question early on that ended up mattering more than anything else in the whole case: how the deposit on our house had been funded. 10 years earlier, before Declan and I even married, my parents had given us a lump sum toward the deposit as a wedding gift, not a loan, not something we'd ever discussed paying back, just a gift, the way parents sometimes do. It had gone straight into the account we used for the deposit, and the transfer record still existed, sitting quietly in an old bank statement neither of us had thought about in a decade. My solicitor told me plainly that this mattered, that in a separation, money brought into a family home from one side doesn't just disappear into an even split, especially when there's a clean paper trail proving exactly where it came from and when. I want to pause here and say something simple, because I think it's easy to hear a detail like that and assume I went looking for an angle. I didn't go looking for a legal advantage that night in my kitchen. I went looking for the truth. The advantage showed up on its own months later, because it turned out the truth had been sitting quietly in our own finances the whole time, waiting for someone to actually look properly. Over the following weeks, my solicitor's office built the full picture, and it was considerably worse than 4 hotel nights. Formal financial disclosure, the legal process, not guesswork on my part, turned up 2 more charges at the same hotel that I hadn't caught myself, going back closer to a year before the wedding. A phone upgrade billed to our joint account that Declan had told me at the time was a work reimbursement coming through late, which never actually came through because there was no reimbursement, because there was no work trip behind it in the first place, a handful of dinners I'd never thought twice about. And one weekend, booked on paper as a work conference in a hotel 2 counties over. That turned out when my solicitor's office formally requested corroboration from Declan's own employer to have no conference on the calendar at all for anyone that entire month. I filed for judicial separation 6 weeks after the wedding. Not a trial separation, not a let's see how things go for a few months. I want to be blunt about why, because I think people expect a slower, softer version of this story, and I'm not going to give them one. Declan had already shown me exactly how long he was capable of lying while things looked completely fine on the surface. A full year, by the time it was all counted up. I wasn't interested in giving him more time to get even better at it. He was served at work, on a Tuesday, by a process server, not by me standing in our kitchen with a prepared speech, because I'd decided months earlier that he didn't get a version of this where I explained myself to him first. I found out afterward, from his brother, that he'd gone pale in front of 2 colleagues and had to leave the building for 20 minutes before he could function again. I didn't feel sorry about that when I heard it. I'm not going to pretend I did, and I'm not going to soften it into something gentler than it actually was, because he hadn't softened a single thing for me the night before that wedding. His mother rang me about a week after he was served. I hadn't told her anything myself. I'd made a point of not telling his family anything directly, because it wasn't my job to manage how his own choices reached the people who loved him. She'd heard some version of it from Declan himself, garbled and half-true, the way confessions tend to be when the person confessing is still trying to protect themselves. She asked me, on the phone, if there was any chance of working it out. I told her, as plainly as I could manage, that I wasn't the one who'd need to do any working out. That had already happened, over the better part of a year, without me in the room. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she said she understood, and she thanked me for still letting Declan see the kids. That was the last real conversation we had about any of it. I don't think she ever fully forgave him either, though that's not something she and I have ever discussed directly, and I've never asked. Here's what it actually added up to, once disclosure was finished, laid out the way my solicitor laid it out for me in a single meeting near the end. €4,830 in joint money traced directly to the affair, hotels, dinners, the phone. The house, worth just under $400,000, split not 50-50, but weighted toward me, because of a documented deposit my parents gave a decade earlier that Declan had never once mentioned when he pictured, if he ever pictured it at all, how this would go, if it ever came out. And 2 solicitors' letters, sitting in a separate case file that had nothing to do with mine on paper, both with Declan's name inside them, because it turned out the affair he'd been having wasn't some private, contained thing on his side either. His name was already most of the evidence in a completely different divorce before I'd even found out about him myself. There was one conversation in a mediation room, close to a year into all of it, where Declan finally said something honest to me. He said, "I never thought the wedding would be how you found out." I told him the truth, once, and I only said it once, because I'd decided a long time before that meeting that I wasn't going to give him more than one sentence. "You didn't think I'd find out at all. The wedding is just when I happen to." That was the only thing I said to him in that entire meeting. My solicitor handled the rest, and I sat there and let her. What happened after that spread the way things spread in a small town, which is to say, nobody had to tell anybody anything, and everybody knew within about 6 weeks regardless. Court filings aren't secret documents locked in a vault. Neither is a solicitor's office in a town where half the county went to school together, or is related to somebody who did. Declan's name being in 2 separate cases at once wasn't something I leaked to anyone. It was simply a fact that existed, in writing, filed in a public system, and facts like that don't stay contained in a place where everyone's cousin works at somebody's office. His mother heard the fuller version from a woman at her hairdresser's, not from me, which she told me herself, sounding almost embarrassed about it. His brother Cormac heard it from his own solicitor, who'd heard it secondhand from someone at the courthouse in passing. By the time it reached the wider family, at gatherings I mostly stopped attending, the story wasn't simply, Declan's marriage broke down. It had become, Declan gave a speech about loyalty at his own brother's wedding while his affair was already sitting in the middle of somebody else's court case. Nobody had to exaggerate a single part of that. It was just what had actually happened, laid out plainly in the order it had happened in, and plain facts travel faster than anything anyone could invent. Declan worked in insurance, selling policies mostly to people he already knew. Farmers, small shop owners, families his own family had done business with for 2 generations. That kind of work runs almost entirely on people trusting you with the truth about their lives, their homes, their cars, the things they can't afford to get wrong. Within a year, 3 long-standing clients had quietly moved their policies elsewhere. Nobody made a scene about it, and nobody wrote him an angry letter explaining why. People in small towns rarely do either of those things. They just stop calling, and eventually you notice the phone hasn't rung in a while. The affair itself didn't survive any of this either, and I want to say that plainly, because I think people expect a story like this to end with the two of them running off together into some happy second chapter, defiant and in love despite everything, and that's simply not what happened here. Aisling, that's what I'll call her, was going through her own case with her husband at the exact same time Declan was going through his with me. 2 collapsing marriages, 2 sets of solicitors, 2 sets of financial disclosure, running in parallel, with the same affair sitting quietly at the center of both of them. There was no room in any of that for romance, whatever romance had existed between them before. What was left, by the time both cases were finished, was 2 people who'd built something out of secrecy and stolen time, and secrecy was the one thing neither of them had left once everything was already sitting out in the open for anyone to read. I heard, secondhand, months later, that they weren't together anymore within the year. I don't know if that's exactly accurate down to the month. I stopped asking around at a certain point, because it stopped being information I needed. Cormac rang me himself, about 4 months into the whole thing, not to gossip and not to take sides in any obvious way, but because he said he needed to say one thing to me directly. He told me he'd worked out, once the dates became public through the case filings, that I had already known everything on his wedding day and had said nothing. He asked me why. I told him the truth, that it wasn't his mess to inherit on the one day that was supposed to be entirely his, and that I wasn't going to be the one who made it his problem a day earlier than it needed to be. He went quiet on the phone for a while. Then he said thank you, plainly, the way his brother never quite managed to say anything plainly, and that was the whole conversation. We're not close, the way we might have been in some other version of this story, but we're not strangers either, and I think that's about as much as either of us expected once the dust settled. There's one more piece of this that closed itself off, almost by accident, near the very end. My solicitor mentioned to me, purely as a professional courtesy, that the other case, the one belonging to the solicitor who'd rung me that first Friday night, had settled a few months before mine finally did. I never spoke to that solicitor again after that first phone call. I never needed to. He'd done the one thing he'd set out to do, which was make sure I wasn't the last person in the whole affair to find out the truth. And once he'd done that, his part in my life was finished. I think about that phone call more than almost anything else in this entire story, honestly. A stranger, doing a difficult, decent thing for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. The night before, it would have been far easier for everyone involved if he'd simply said nothing at all. I didn't do any of this to destroy him, and I'm not going to pretend I was some kind of mastermind sitting in my kitchen that Friday night plotting his downfall stage by stage. I did exactly 3 things, the whole way through, and I've thought about this enough to be able to say it that simply. I told the truth whenever it was asked of me. I let the legal process my solicitor laid out run the way it was designed to run, without trying to speed it up out of spite or slow it down out of pity. And I didn't protect Declan from a single consequence that was already sitting there, waiting to be his. Everything else, the house, the money, the clients, the way his own family looked at him differently after that wedding, none of that came from me reaching out and taking it from him. It came from him having built an entire year of his life on the assumption that nobody was ever going to check. Here's where things actually stand, plainly, because I'm not going to end this with anything softer than the truth deserves. I kept the house, not all of it as some symbolic victory lap. I kept it because the numbers, once they were properly laid out in a solicitor's office, said it was mine to keep, weighted by money my parents put into it before Declan and I had even set a wedding date of our own. I have the kids most of the time. Declan sees them every second weekend, and to his credit, he shows up for that part reliably. I'll give him that much, and I won't pretend to give him any more than that. The €4,830 was accounted for in the settlement, subtracted plainly from what he would otherwise have walked away with. His name is still attached to a second case that never had anything to do with me directly, and I don't follow it anymore, because it stopped being my business the day my own case closed. His client list is shorter than it was 2 years ago. I don't know if it'll recover, and I've noticed I don't think about that much anymore either, which surprised me the first time I realized it. My daughter is 9 now. She still has the flower basket from that day, minus most of the ribbons, sitting in the back of her wardrobe. She's never once asked me a single question about what happened that weekend, and I've never once brought it up to her. My son doesn't remember much about the wedding at all, which I'm grateful for in a way I didn't expect to be. Neither of them lost a father over any of this, even though I made sure, at every point, that he lost quite a lot of everything else. Am I dating again? No, not yet, and I'm in no particular hurry about it either. That's not a sad admission. It's just where I am, 2 years on, and I've stopped feeling like I owe anyone a timeline for how quickly I'm supposed to move past something like this. I still see Declan's mother occasionally, at school events or in town, and it's civil. In the careful way these things end up being civil. I don't think she blames me for any of it, and I've never once heard her make excuses for him either, which is more than I expected from a woman who spent 30 years thinking her older son could do no wrong. Cormac and Roisin are still married, still fine, and their wedding photos are still up on their own wall, exactly the way they should be, untouched by any of this, because that was the entire point of waiting. I'm not going to tell you I feel guilty about any of it, because I don't, and I'm done pretending a story like this needs a guilty person in it who isn't the one who actually did the damage in the first place. Declan didn't lose the house, the money, his family's good opinion of him, or his own client list, because I decided one night to punish him for what he'd done. He lost all of it because he did the maths wrong the night before that wedding. He thought a phone call from a stranger was going to be the worst part of what happened to me that Friday. It wasn't. It was the only warning I got, and I made absolutely sure it was enough. I don't have a soft lesson to leave you with, and I'm not going to invent one just to end this on a gentler note than it actually deserves. Some people get caught the same week. Some people get caught the night before their own brother's wedding, from a solicitor they've never met, representing a woman they've never heard of, and by the time they realize what's actually happening, the person who found out has already decided exactly how she's going to handle it, and she's not going to tell them a single thing until she's good and ready. If you've ever had to get through one more ordinary day, a wedding, a birthday, a Tuesday at work, already knowing something that was about to change everything, and you did it anyway, without letting anyone see it on your face, I want to hear about it. That's most of why I tell these. Drop your thoughts in the comments if you made it to the end. I read every single one.